Do you want to secure exclusive expert insight? We've commissioned a research piece with Shift Research to discover the state of account-based marketing in APAC. The finished report will give all B2B marketers across APAC a better understanding of how top firms are leveraging account-based marketing and the results they're getting within the region. We have a short survey you can access at xgrowth.com.au/survey, which allows you to participate in this research. And your contribution is super important, even if you're not actively working on your ABM strategy right now. As a thank you for participating, we'll send you an early access version of the report and an invite to an expert Q&A webinar. To get started, head to xgrowth.com.au/survey. That's xgrowth.com.au/survey and secure your early access to these valuable insights today. Each episode on Growth Connie, we bring you B2B leaders to learn about their successes, fails, and what's working for them in the market. If you enjoy this episode, please consider giving us a 5-star rating on Apple and Spotify and share the pod with a friend. And of course, make sure to join our community Slack channel at growthconnie.org/Slack to connect with our members. Enough from me, let's dive right in.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode. I'm Shahin Hoda with Xgrowth, and today I'm talking to Nick Sheehan, CEO and founder at EFEX, about how to prepare your organization for a merger or getting acquired, especially in the B2B landscape. Now, this is the second time we're having Nick on the show, so I'm super excited to have this conversation. Nick, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Shahin. Thanks for having me back. Obviously, I didn't do a bad job the first time. To get invited back a second time is probably a tick the box moment for me, mate. So thank you for having me,
mate. I love our conversation. It's just so real and no bullshit, and it's just you present it the way it is. So I love it.
Well, we do have a very genuine, we've always had it's a relationship we've always had that's, I feel like it's a very genuine relationship, mate. And, I've got, an interest in, talking to you, and I'm sure you're the same. So it's, I do enjoy our time together.
Yeah, same here. Now, I know that there has been a lot of things going on at EFEX recently, okay? And we're talking about kind of mergers and acquisitions in the B2B space. So I think it would be good to paint a little bit of a picture for people who are listening really quick of, why we're having this conversation, which is mainly because of what's been happening at EFEX. So can you give us a quick overview of like the past 12 months or so, what's been going on?
So the business started in 2013 and kind of grew organically, but then also grew through acquisition. So to do that, there's two very different skill sets that are required to maintain or to facilitate that growth. And I guess, if you're going to grow organically, that can be a very slow process. If you can grow through acquisition, that can be a much faster process. Both things have their pros and cons, and I think I've experienced all facets of the pros and the cons on both. Look, for me, I got to the point where, we had grown through both prisms. There is a point at which, you go and borrow money and you go and take on a little bit of equity investment here and there. But there comes a point where, like, if you actually want the business to be, and I use this statement all the time, if you want the business to be the best it can be, almost like a child, right? Everyone wants, that you want all you want for your child is for it to be the best it can be. And I think a business is very much the same when you start a business. If you want the business to be the best that it can be, the self-reflection is you probably can't do it on your own. And I think that moment, is really critically important. And the emotional intelligence that comes with, getting to that point it takes time. And for some people, it's really quick. And for some people, they never want to get to that point. But for me, I'd certainly gotten to a point where I knew where the opportunity was. I knew what I needed to do, but I was, I kind of got the place to a point where I felt we needed a bit of help to get to the next level and to let the business be the best it can be. So we went down the path of talking to, equity investors because, I was very much aware that relationship was kind of going to be like a marriage, and it certainly actually is like a marriage. I'm not married, so not that I have my own personal experiences to draw on, but the alignment that's required for that to be successful is so important. And I guess that is where we got to. Was I felt that was the right path for FX, and then I guess the next step was, okay, so how do we go about procuring that relationship, or how do we go about getting our business to a point where it's ready for that sort of transaction?
What do you think were things that you did, let's say a certain number of years ago, let's say 5 years ago, that really sets you up for success or sets you up on the course to be able to accomplish something that, and look, I can't remember the numbers. I think it was $30 million that the PE purchased from FX. Is that right?
Sold. So basically, I sold down 50% of the company, in a transaction that valued the business at, circa $60 million.
Got it.
So yeah, it was a big transaction for me, and
course,
a
massive transaction. Massive.
Yeah, but transformational for the business, and then as a founder, transformational for me personally. But
so, what do you think some of the things that you did 5 years ago to kind of set you on this course and had a really crucial impact?
Yeah, the biggest thing that we did was we made a decision back in 2018 to focus on growing up. And what I mean by growing up, we went and we approached KPMG, and we started on a path of getting, audited on an annual basis by KPMG. So that process, though, to go from being a small private company to being a company that goes through the rigor and the process and the level of certification, I guess, that you get to by being a private company that is audited by one of the big four, makes you lean into the issues in your business, very fast, because, what those processes do is they shine a light on the things that you're doing really well, but they shine a light on the things that you're doing very poorly. And the biggest mistake that we can all make is stick our head in the sand and say, everything we do is perfect and, we're great and all those things. Like, every business needs to improve. And that process of us being audited in a financial sense from KPMG gave us the financial rigor that we could then demonstrate to banks and institutions and institutional investors that we had the process and we had the maturity that we were a business that was, worth investing in.
Got it.
Because I think the biggest thing is, like, there's a really big difference between being a business that, gets Joe down the road to do your books, and then, when you spend the money and spend the time and spend the headspace on actually focusing on compliance and focusing on growing up, that for our business, that's really taken us to the next level.
Can you paint us a little bit of picture? 2018, this happened. Like, what was the state of the company, and maybe the numbers that you can share in terms of maybe the number of employees. What state were you in when you kind of started talking to KPMG?
We were like probably 120 employees, and we were probably going to turn over 50 mil, and we were probably doing at that point probably 7.5 to 10% EBITDA on an earnings basis. So we were probably a medium-sized business, but I guess what you find is that we grew so quick that we were so focused on progress that oftentimes we would not have the level of process that was required then for us to go to the next level. And so that was really, for me, starting to bring in some of those externals. What that allowed us to do was, you've got to view the business not through your lens, but you've got to view it, you've got to understand how people view you. And that is, for me, or that was for me, the catalyst for us to go on that journey, because I wanted to be able to, walk into any of these processes and just be really clear and confident and concise on our numbers and our, and how we formulated those numbers and the accounting standards and all that stuff that ends up being a hurdle in a process if you don't get that shit right down here, right? So we got, and it wasn't like you don't just get these guys in and it's all cool. Like we had to go and work on a lot of stuff and fix a lot of stuff. And that was great stuff. We learned a lot about our business. We learned a lot about how we recognize revenue. We learned a lot about, and it upskilled our people. Our people upskilled through that process as well. And it gave us a vernacular, a single language about how we spoke about our business internally that we were confident that we could demonstrate to externals that we actually know what we're doing. And that is, and because, whenever you go through a process, they're going to bring in one of these guys. They're going to bring in, BDO, KPMG, PwC. They're going to bring someone in to go through you, with smelling salts. So you want to be ready for that. And, if you've got a bit of paper from KPMG or whoever it is that says, we've looked at these guys, we're external, we've looked at these guys, and we think that what they are saying is right, that's a huge step in the right direction. And well, that for us was the start of the journey with where we are today.
Got it. So 2018 obviously was a big year. It sounded like it was a step change for EFEX as an organization. Had there been other step changes maybe after or before that?
That was the biggest. So we did a very big merger, effectively a merger of equals in 2018, and it was what it was. It was about, I had identified that I really wanted to play in regional Australia, and there was a business that we bought through that transaction that was a big player in regional Queensland. So yeah, I mean, I went from managing a staff of 60 to a staff of 120 overnight. More so, went from managing 3 or 4 locations to managing 10 or 12. And, I hadn't had a lot of at that stage, I hadn't had a lot of experience in regional Australia. So for me, it was a huge learning curve, but I think played, it certainly was a curve that played to my strengths, which was I got out and spent a lot of time in the regions, understood what the drivers were for both staff and customer. That was, our story, and I explain to people, and it's oftentimes I explain to people like with staff, like you get staff who business grows, and that puts pressure on like the supply chain, and whether that's the staff, the customers, the systems, the cash flow, there's 1,000 things. But oftentimes the first place you see that stress of those step changes in staff. So I have these you get staff come in and I'm stressed and all these things, and that stuff's all probably down to the fact that, they're running a lot faster than they had before. We need to resource them better. We need to create better process alignment. We need to articulate things better. There's a bunch of reasons. But I think, and I explain this to staff, like this business is like a set of stairs. So what we do is you go up, and that's really painful. And then you start going across, and then it gets really boring. And then we just start going up again, and that gets really painful. So that's the process that I think most businesses go on. You go between being in pain or being really, and I mean bored as in like it's BAU, we're just, ticking along, getting our results, doing what we should do. But ultimately, if you've got someone in your business like me who's got a bit of undiagnosed, ADD, at some point, I'm going to want to go up the staircase again because there's opportunity or there's whatever there is. So it's just educating people when we're going up that remember the last time we went up, we ended up plateauing out. You just got to keep reminding people that it's not constantly up. At some point we do plateau and things get normal again, and we get back to a normal operating rhythm. But guess what I've found is that most staff, when you explain it to them in that sense, they do relish that opportunity, because I think a lot of people go to work every day and they're just bored shitless. And typically in our business, people are never bored. There's always great stuff going on. We're always moving. We're always innovating. We're always trying to be better. And people understand that that's just a point in, I heard this saying, it's like success is just a point in time. And that's really true. Like if you're not trying to be better, you're probably going backwards. So we just talk to our staff a lot about that. That's been helpful.
So Nick, that's a little bit of the step changes in the business, right? But I also love to hear, as a founder, the step changes that you went through and the kind of experiences you personally had when you were going through these. I remember we were chatting before and you were talking about the time that you went to the park, and I think you mentioned you had taken a big loan
You said you weren't going to bring this up, on
Did I? I
I don't know. I'm happy to talk about it. It's colloquially known amongst my inner circle as the park incident. So I'm happy to talk about the park incident. But
no, we'll cut it out. We'll cut it out.
no, that's right. It's not. Nothing's off limits. Like, and you know what? If anything, like it gives people a bit of insight as to like the vulnerability sometimes that we all have.
The life of a founder, and I think it's just so inspiring, but also I feel like I can't remember if we said I'm not going to bring it up. Okay.
No, we didn't. No, we didn't. No. I was just having a laugh.
So
bring it up.
But it's out now. But this is one of the things that I love about our conversations, that it just gets super real. And but that was one example. I'd love to hear about kind of the step changes that you've gone through as a person to get to where you are now.
Self-reflection for me has probably never been one of my strong suits. Even now, like I sit here and, we're an organisation of circa 300 people. We've got sort of 20 locations and I don't often sit and think about day one. But, day one was, I walked into an office, it was 45 square metres. It was just me. I've actually got a photo, which I'll share with you one time. It was the night that I went in and set up the desks. The night that I went in and set up the desks in North Sydney, and it was just me, and I was like, okay, so got to get going. So Nick Sheehan, at that point in 2013, and Nick Sheehan at this point in 2022, I'm probably a very different person. I don't think my core values have changed, and I think that's been probably the secret to why we've been able to, maintain such a great focus around customers or clients, customers and staff. But you do change, and anyone that is out there that says they don't change is not telling you the truth, because the skills that are required to run a business when there's one person and the skills that are required to run a business with 300 people are two totally different things. And the self-awareness that's required to know what you're good at and what you're not good at all those different junctures. So whether at all those different step changes is just critically important to the business being successful. There's things like managing your time. Managing time is a huge one, and it's something that I've had to become very, very good at. Managing my weaknesses and making sure that I've got people around me that are able to fill the gaps, because there's a heap of stuff that I'm really not good at, and so I'm actually much more valuable to the company if I just spend time on things that I am. And then I think personally, the real thing to talk about, and let's be honest, is like the toll that these journeys take on other parts of your life, like failed relationships, and there's just things that happen. And I look back, not with regret, but there is times when I look back and reflect upon stuff that's happened in my life, and a lot of that has been around. I've just been so singularly focused on this that sometimes I've not been as great at maintaining and procuring relationships along the way, because I read this quote. It was something like, you got to expect that the energy you expend in a certain area is going to have a deficit at some other part in your life. And it's so true. Like, I meet so many wonderful people, like in different walks of life. Like I meet wonderful husbands and fathers, and I meet wonderful business people and wonderful but you can't, like, my view is this, and it's going to be probably unpopular, but I'll tell you anyway. And it's in my view, it's probably, there's a lot of truth in it. It's like, you cannot be unbelievable at everything. If you want to be unbelievable at something, that is going to probably mean that you're going to have areas in your life that probably you need to tighten up. And I think that is very much true for me, and very much true for most founders and people that are growth orientated. It's unrealistic to think that you can be really, 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 really successful in one part of your life and be able to replicate that in every other part of your life. That is no human being that will give you that assurance. I think it's a bit of it's the old iceberg theory, right? People just see what's above the iceberg, but they don't, there's a lot of stuff that goes on under the water that's like, it's not bad. It's not murky. It's just,
it's just life.
You just lose stuff. You lose, like, I get a call once a week from my mum. She's like, I'm still here. Like, why don't you call me? Like things that are, and they're actually important things, right? Like family is important. Friendships are important. People are important. But, unfortunately, there is collateral damage that comes with success, and there's collateral damage that comes with being singularly focused. I call them, there's plenty of red wine stories, right? Like there's plenty of things that you could you could really cry in your cabernet on a Friday night over. But I mean, it's always it's always like everyone else. I think my life is I try and focus a lot on balance. But I think people that have a lot of balance typically sometimes aren't really good at any one thing, and so we've all got our strengths and we've all got our weaknesses, and there is a human toll that comes with growing something like this, and you've just got to accept that sometimes that's the case.
I totally understand what you're saying. Where you just said it so succinctly. Where you spend energy in one area, you kind of start losing attention in some of the other areas. But then before that, you also talked about time management and how you started focusing on that. Are there ways or techniques or things that you would do earlier where you might be cutting out certain things in order to pay attention to some of the other things that are more important? How have you changed that or modified that from a time management perspective so you can maybe not become perfect in all these areas, but be able to provide more resources to some of these?
I think you get to a point where you realise that you can't say yes to everything. And if you do, then you'll end up, unfortunately, letting a whole heap of people down. So I think it's actually an exercise in working out what's most important to you. And if you ask, and I get asked that question all the time, and I can't even articulate it now. I'm not actually good, as I said, I'm not actually good at that self-reflection piece about. I'm probably okay at the emotional intelligence piece. I can tell you actually what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. But I'm not really good on the self-reflection piece on the history and if I made this adjustment, would this change my course? But I think for me, it was actually just working out what was most important. And those decisions can be and have been for me, really painful. And sometimes it's meant, there was one clear instance in my life where I had to make a decision between a relationship succeeding and me spending more time over, and it's painful. It's like, and I think this was 2000 and I don't know, 16, 17.
Wow, so it would have been like 17. Early years of the business as well.
I think about probably 17. I think about it most days. I don't think about it like I made the wrong decision. Clearly, I probably haven't, but I think about it. I don't think you're human if you don't think about those decisions. But let's be clear. Everyone in my position will have had to make those choices along the way, and it's not just in my case, it was a good girlfriend, but it could be friendships. It could be lots of things. We've all got 24 hours in a day, and we've all got a discrete level of focus that we're able to give things. And pick your poison. Unfortunately, being better at time management for me has had to start with me working out actually what's most important to me and being a little bit ruthless in that sense. And I don't mean ruthless like ruthless towards others. I just mean ruthless with myself. And then being, if that's your decision, and as I said, pick your poison, being true to yourself, and then being the best you can be in what you choose. I think we all make decisions, and then ultimately our decisions make us. So you want to make. I mean, you can always change your course, and there's always an opportunity that things change. But I would encourage, I guess, from the history for me was that at that point in my life, there was two paths, and the path that I chose, I still think about a lot, but it helped define where I spent my time, and therefore has probably contributed towards some of the success I've had.
That is such a big component that a lot of founders or people who are starting or jumping on this journey might not realize, that the toll that it's going to take on them from in terms of their attention and their hours. What would you say is important for kind of a founder to decide early on to have more clarity in terms of how they're going to navigate? Like how would they, they're in someone that maybe they're in the first year, second year. How would you say, hey, you need to think about this like this? What would that be in your opinion?
I come back to this point. Every business must have a critical point of difference, and that thing, whatever it is, and every business is different, and it changes. Like one year it could be X, and next year it could be Y, and that's okay because markets change and people change and technology changes and the world geopolitically changes. Things change every day, right? So you got to be non-negotiable on the destination, and negotiable on how you get there. So every year, your critical point of difference could change. But that's the thing that you got to keep coming back to, because that's the reason they deal with you and not someone else. And I think what people forget is their secret sauce. So I think, we've all got to work out what our secret sauce is. And then that thing has then got to dictate where you spend your time. For me, it was a lot about, growth is about revenue generation, and it's about revenue generation, right? It's about getting new customers. It's about getting new contracts. It's about, being visible here or there. But so for me, it was about revenue generation and growth. And our critical point of difference for me was like, whether you deal with FX or you deal with the guy down the road, people only really remember the way you make them feel. People really, 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 really want to deal with people that have empathy and understand and that value partnership and that have a level of urgency. And there's all these little things that go into what I think is our secret sauce. So my view, and talking about a guy or a girl who is a year or two into that journey, it's like I would try and be really defined about that, because that will drive your activity and that will drive where you spend your time. Because once you break that down, you're then going to have a number of actions that sit under that. Because if you I don't know, like if you whatever you do, there's 4 or 5 things that will go into you being successful at executing on what makes you different. So I just think it's like working out what those 4 or 5 things are, and then just being extremely non-negotiable in your focus on those 4 or 5 things. I think that's it. Like what we all do is actually pretty simple. Like business is actually pretty simple. There's a lot of people actually that like love making it complex, but it's actually not complex. Like I've actually back to this KPMG stuff. Like before 2013, like I'd never seen a balance sheet, and I really couldn't. That was all a bit. I'm able now to have. We've got great people around me clearly, and I feel like I'm a good numbers guy now, but that hasn't always been the case. So you will change, the business will change, your strengths will change and grow. And my thing would be non-negotiable on why would someone buy something from me and not from Joe down the road. Like if you can work that out and stick to that, you'll be successful.
I feel like, when you talk about secret sauce, I feel like a lot of companies, when they start growing, they add water to the secret sauce, so it gets diluted that way, rather than having a thick sauce that just grows in magnitude. And at the end of it, it's just you have an aftertaste of the secret sauce.
Good companies know what they do well, and they double and triple down. Good companies know what they do well, and they just double and triple down. They're not everything to everyone. They just like, I do this, and I'm just going to be the best at that, and I'm going to own that market, and I'm going to be so strong and knowledgeable and resourceful, and they're successful and oftentimes it's not sexy, really good companies, they're not that sexy, but they just focus on that need in the market. They are the best in that market. People come to them because of their attention and direction and focus. And it doesn't have to be shiny, it doesn't have to be shiny.
Nick, from some of our past conversations, and I think you even mentioned it now, I feel like one of your main strengths is the ability to sell, and maybe in that sales and marketing kind of side of things. When did you kind of realize, and what was it that you realized that you need to bring on board that was outside of KPMG is 2018, so it's it's a bit further out. You've grown the business to a certain degree, but what were some of the steps before that you're like, what, we really need to build this thing, and now I realize how much more important it is, and I'm really not the person, I can't get my head around it. What were some of those facets of the business that you start to slowly realize that need to be built?
The first bit of self sort of evaluation I did was work out that I'm actually not a bad leader, but I'm actually not a very good manager, is the truth. And there actually is a difference. You can be a great leader and not be a great manager, and you can be a great manager and not be a good leader. And I think for me, it was working out that management, or the managing of individuals on a micro basis, doesn't mean micromanaging them, but just, that's not my cup of tea. So I'm really great at articulating strategy. I'm really great at execution. I'm really great at getting shit done. I'm really great at cutting through the rubbish. I'm really great at selling and talking to customers and articulating strategy and values. But like, I don't want to sit down and do, performance appraisals with staff. I don't want to sit down and have hard HR discussions. So for me, it was that, and it was about, as a growth business, it was so important for me to get people around me that were able to manage, because if you don't have structure in your business, the wheels will fall off. Now I've got, as a business, we're very non-hierarchical. So we've got we've CEO, we've got a CFO, we've got a COO, we've got a chief technology, all these people who have got really fancy, lovely titles, but none of us are ego-driven or egotistical. None of us believe our own bullshit. And I think those people sort of sit around me and just allow me to just run really fast and do the things that I'm good at, but equally they put the structure and the process in place that allows me to and the key thing is, right, I've got five reports. Like, me managing 5 senior reports is pretty easy, because if they're any good, with a weekly catch up, if they're any good, like, the reality is, right, if you're getting paid more than 200 grand, you should be able to self-select. Like, you shouldn't need micromanagement. Or call it 200, 250, like the number, whatever the number is. The number's not important, but if you've got a C next to your name, like, it's really about agreeing with those people on outcomes, and then just roadblocks and checking in. And as long as we're all communicating and articulating things correctly, it's not management as such, and I think for me, it was just working that out for myself, taking myself out of that management layer, getting good managers in the business, allowing me to a lot of the times be the good guy, and which I enjoy. And that doesn't mean I have hard conversations. I'm not one for walking away from conflict, or, I have hard conversations every day. Like, it's like, there's days I go home and
It's been a brutal day.
it's we just have good days and bad days.
Yeah,
That's normal in life, whether you're digging holes or whatever you're doing. No one's immune from having a bad day. And I guess for me, I still have to have hard conversations, and I still have to be direct, and I still have to give feedback, and I still have to maintain a focus on the outcomes, and that with that comes having good and bad conversations along the way. But I just try to make them constructive, and I typically don't manage into the detail with C-level people, because if I have to, they're probably not C-level people, is the truth.
What was the first senior hire that you had to bite the bullet and you're like, oh my God, how much am I paying for salary? What was that like? Tell me about that.
Yeah, it's funny. We've got, so of that group of 5, I've been so fortunate that 3 of those 5 have been on the journey for a long time. And so they probably started out doing everything, and then as we grew, they were able to specialize and, get closer to a particular area of interest or a particular strength of theirs. So, that wouldn't be applicable as such. But, a couple of years ago, about 12 months ago, I hired a chief operating officer, and that was a very important hire to me, because that person effectively takes me out of the day-to-day. Now, I'll never be out of the day-to-day, because I'm in it's my nature to want to understand what's going on. And it's also my job, obviously, to understand what's going on. So you're never out of the day-to-day, but certainly this person, the role of the operating officer is to take the CEO out of the hand-to-hand combat. And so, that was a big hire for me, because that's scary for anyone in, I guess, my situation, or, if you're a founder or if you're CEO, because you just, you work so hard on a value set and what the business should look like and what the people should look like and how we talk to each other and how we talk to customers. Like, if you make a wrong decision there, like, you're in all sorts of trouble. Like, you really, like, that is hugely detrimental to your business, because that person does have a huge influence on a lot of the reporting tree and structures, and, they are the day-to-day facing the business of good decisions and bad. So decision I made, and for me it was a great, I knew this person for, I had a natural level of comfort with them. Our personalities are very aligned, and we have a very respectful, open. He's a bit of an older brother to me in some ways, and he's got a bit more grey hair than me, so that helps. But if he's listening, I'll probably get a message at some point. But the key thing is, like, you got to have that closeness. And for me, it's worked out.
if you go back, would you make a hire like that earlier, or you think, at the point that you made that hire, that was the right time? I'm just, from
It's great question. Great question.
yeah. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd make it earlier
Why is that?
because he has brought so much value to the place, and he has such a different skill set than me. I couldn't do his job.
Why do you think you didn't?
Because as the business grows, the things you reflect on change.
What do you mean by that?
Well, when you've got 100 people, and when you've got 200 people, and when you've got 300 people, that requires different skill sets. At every, like, if you've got 100 people, they really probably want to hear from me every day. Maybe they don't, but I'll just use that statement. But when you've got 300 people, the business actually becomes a lot less about me, and it becomes more about us. And from a journey perspective, every founder is on that journey to actually not make the business about you. Because back to M&A discussion, right? If you've got a business and it's all about you, you know what it's worth?
Zero.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Zero. Well, it's not worth zero. But you understand my point. You have not created anything that works if you get hit by a bus. You all you have is what's in your head, or what you have is IP, or what you have is not a business. It's a dictatorship. And you got to create a business. A valuable business is not reliant on any one person. And for me, where I got to with our COO was the right time for me to. It happened when we were going through a lot of M&A activity. I was buying things and trying to do all sorts of stuff. So it took me away from the business. But that hire made the business less about Nick Sheehan, and that is so important. And it's a critical building block that everyone's going to go through at some point, where you've got to work out that you're that guy or you're not that guy, and guy, girl, whatever. But having the courage to make that decision, that's a big leap, because there's a lot of control you give up. There's a lot of relevance you give up. Yeah, that's not a binary decision that you can make overnight. But for me, it was probably the best decision I made in the business, because culturally it's been amazing, and it's allowed the business to become a lot more holistic. And I'm still, ultra involved, and I'm, everything. But as I said, it's like we've got a lot more. I've got more tools at my disposal from an execution perspective. We get a lot more done.
Last question that I want to ask is, and it's kind of related to what we already discussed, is in hindsight, if you would go back, what are some of the decisions that you would make differently, or some of the decisions that you would make, period, to kind of push FX even further forward? We talked about the chief operating, the COO role. That might have been something that you might have done earlier. Are there other examples that you like, we should have done this at that point, or we should have done this differently?
Get the best question for last, didn't you?
Oh, I just had to. Or the answer is, man, we're just going so quickly, we don't have time to think about the past. All right.
There's a bit of that. We do grow very quickly. You know what I would have done? We have an extremely, extremely experienced. We've always had, great HR staff in the business, and I say that very, genuinely. We've been very lucky to have caring, great people on the way. We were in a position where we hired a very senior HR person, people and culture they call it these days, Shahin, not HR.
Yep.
And that has made an immeasurable impact on our business, because what does she do? She has such an influence on the temperature gauge at an individual level. And that for us, I mentioned the COO hire, but also someone, if you've got a growing group of people, and you're managing people across a lot of jurisdictions, geography like we are, having someone that's able to keep everyone glued together is a very, very, very good thing. And what it has meant for me is that I don't have to be that, I can still have those conversations, those pastoral care conversations, I can still have them, but to have others in the business that are able to talk to people about things that don't involve what they do between 9 and 5, that's something that I probably would have done a long time ago. And the thing with acquiring businesses is what you acquire a lot of good stuff, but you also acquire a lot of shit. And what that person, if it's the right person, helps you to do is to kind of
sift through that.
I don't say shit. I don't mean people as such. I just mean like baggage. Like, everyone's got baggage. Every person's got baggage. Every business has got baggage. That person allows that process to be so much more linear because it is about getting around and bringing in, and you can't do that on your own. You need a team, and to get someone that from a people and culture perspective that has a real feel on pulse, for me, has been very, very, very successful.
Nick, this has been another awesome conversation. I mean, this was a, we went up and down, left and right.
We're talking about relationships. I mean,
well,
this is like
really funny.
Dr. Phil or something.
No, I think it's really amazing where this conversation went, where we were talking about mergers and acquisitions, and what it really came down to people at the end of it. And I just finished reading this book called Who Not How, which talks about Dan Sullivan. He talks about how you got to change your mindset from thinking about how do I do this to who should do this and who do I get involved. And this conversation was so amazing that we went from, hey, financials need to be sorted, to boil down at the very end of it to it comes down to people, and it comes down to the people that are on your team and are contributing to the vision of the organization and where it's going. So I think it was a really cool journey that you kind of took us. So I really appreciate it. I love our conversations, and I'm so glad we had you on the podcast again.
We're running out of subjects for the next one, mate. So we're going to have to we'll have to give it a little while before we do another one, so we can sort of.
I don't know. I think we can come up with something. But no, look, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast again, Nick. Thank you so much for your time and all the insights.
See you soon. Good to speak.
This episode of Growth Colony was produced by Alexander Hipwell. It was edited by Dave Samito, with additional editing and music also by Alexander Hipwell. Special thanks to Tina Wabe and Rod Hoda. We couldn't make this show without you. The show is hosted by Shahin Hoda. If you enjoyed the episode, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. Yes, you can rate on Spotify now, so please do. And share the pod with a friend you think could get value out of it. If you'd like to connect with the members of Growth Colony, join our free Slack channel at growthcolony.org/Slack. Thanks again for all the support, and we'll see you again in the next one.